Hi everyone, this is Ivan from Skills Build Training. This channel is all about showing you how to become a highly paid IT pro fast. In today's video, I'm going to show you more features and important skills in Microsoft Azure. Thank you for choosing to watch. To help us help more people like you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, hit the notification bell so that you'll get notified of our future videos. Let's get started. In parts 1 and 2 of our Azure series, we went over the services offered by Microsoft Azure and how to create them. Resources such as virtual networks, virtual machines, DevOps platforms, and Azure Directory were covered. We touched on how to calculate the cost of these services as well. In this video, we're going to go over how Azure helps you monitor all your resources, ensure they follow industry compliance laws, and are built with a maximum level of security. So in our last videos, we went over a lot of this is how you create this, or this is how you make the Active Directory work and such. Today we're going to be going over a more broad view of how you make all of that come together into a functioning cloud deployment. You see, there's a lot more to using cloud resources properly than just how to set them up, how to use them. You also got to think about people's privacy, you got to think about security, and you got to think about the ability to manage all of this at scale. You might only have a team who's working in their DevOps pipeline, but you're also going to have other teams who are using databases. You're going to have your Active Directory admins. You might have multiple offices in multiple regions, people who aren't working in the same rooms. A lot of us are working remotely now. So, how is that going to factor into people's privacy, where the data is going, is it secure? So those are the topics that we're going to be covering in this video. Now, to deal with these issues, groups such as the U.S. Commerce Department have created compliance frameworks. And that's actually the first one we're going to go over. It's NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards, and this is a cybersecurity framework. Most organizations try to follow NIST as much as they can because it's a pretty solid way of finding out where you are currently in your ability to deal with cybersecurity and where you can improve. So as you can see from this diagram, there's different levels where you're going to start first by identifying. And that means you're going to identify what assets do you have? How is the governance of it? What is the management structure? You're going to do what's called a risk assessment and a risk management strategy. So these are interesting points where you start asking yourself, how much risk could our organization face? What would happen if there was a breach? How much liability would we face, even in dollar amounts? So that's kind of a management point of view, but it's very important to do. Then we have protect. Now, protect has to do with access control. So in our case, Azure Active Directory. Awareness training, so teaching your employees and such about phishing schemes and other ways that attackers will focus on them and focus on ways of getting past the usual security precautions. Information protection, so encryption using key vaults, things like that. Process and procedures and protective technologies. Then we go on to detect. Okay, so this is where you finally get to taking all the events and you need some way of detecting the bad in your environment. So this is where you start looking at anomalies. What's the usual network activity? What's the usual connections to different websites? So you have anomalies and events. Security, continuous monitoring, we'll talk about that. Logging everything, making sure you have logs of important processes on your systems that are going to be indicators that there's some sort of compromise. Then you need a response plan. Response planning is really important because what happens when your detections go true positive on you? Now you need to respond. So you want to know who needs to be communicated with. what management needs to be brought in. Does legal department need to be brought in? If it's somebody's private information, should you contact your human resources department? What mitigations will the team take right away? What improvements can be done after the incident response? So that's all part of this framework. Then we have the recovery stage. So we have recovery planning, again, improvements and communication. So on the recover part, that's when you start looking at how well did we handle the event? How well did we follow the procedures we said we were supposed to? How well did we follow all the laws involved? And that's really where you start going back, and it's a feedback loop, because you're not going to be at the highest level at once with NIST. And it could take quite a long time. But each time that you evaluate your organization, you want to have, signposts of where you were and how much you've improved. And that's really how you want to go about becoming as compliant with NIST as you can. Because if you're starting from zero, it's going to take a while. But it's very important in the end, especially when you have a cycle of events with as many adversaries out there trying to steal personal information, trying to breach environments. It's very important to plan ahead. And NIST is a very good framework to start with. The next regulatory framework that you're going to need to be knowledgeable in is called the General Data Protection and Regulation. Now, this is more commonly known as GDPR. GDPR was enacted by the European Union, and its whole purpose is to better protect consumers and their personal data. Now, it's really has been a big game changer in the industry. One, no longer is the EU just going after companies that are in Europe. They're recognizing that European citizens are using services all over the world, and so they're actually holding companies all over the world. They're holding them responsible for what happens to their citizens' data. Beyond that, it's inspired several privacy laws about private data. It's inspired several new laws in the United States, in Asia, everywhere. It's inspired really a new attitude towards privacy and a much more aggressive attitude when it comes to law enforcement. So let's go over some of the key things that were done. I got this chart offline, and it has the key articles nicely bulleted out for us. The first one is explicit consent. And so what that means is you need to click the accept for an agreement that you read. You need to say, yes, it's okay to use cookies. You might notice that pops up now on almost every website, an actual explicit consent. No longer can you just say, oh, this person works here, so they have to follow our monitoring by being an employee. No, they actually have to give explicit consent now. The other thing is right of access. Before, people couldn't always get their own information from a company. And so now people have the right to say, hey, look, I want to see what data you have. I want to see what you have on me. And that's really powerful. Before, you didn't have that. Companies weren't required to be able to provide you a copy of whatever data they had on you. Now you literally can do that. You could write a request to Google and request any information they have on record about you, and they would have to, in a certain amount of time, in a certain reasonable amount of time, produce you a file that has all that information in it. It's very powerful that people now have that kind of right. You also have the right to rectification. This means that if something's not correct in the information they have to fix it. You can say, no, that's not right, fix it. You also have the right to erasure. That's another powerful right that you never really had before. I mean, you could say, hey, you're not supposed to have my information, but there was nothing legally you could do about it. But GDPR puts in a whole new level of individual empowerment by allowing people to say, no, you can't have it, get rid of it. Same thing with right to data portability. Again, the copies, the fact that the data has to be retrievable to the point where they can filter it for the individual and make it available to them. The other thing is DP by design. So it has to be default privacy protection by design, meaning that you can't just put in privacy protection later on when you're making a web application or you're making a piece of software. It has to be built in. There has to be encryption. There has to be proper identification and authentication. There has to be those built-in mechanisms to filter individuals' data so that a data request could be facilitated. Those kind of things all have to be in there by design. If there's any third-party involvement, let's say Facebook has third-party companies that deal with their advertising. That all has to be governed by a specific contract, so you know those third parties are involved. And obviously, this has become a major issue because it was found out that some of these third parties were selling people's information. And if you remember, that was a big deal. Some of Facebook's third parties were doing that. And, they had Google and Facebook before Congress. All that went down. So GDPR is really meant to fight that invisible third party taking your information and, selling it off to whatever. So that has to be agreed upon beforehand. Another thing is data breaches must be reported. Again, if your information was held by a company, whether they were the first party or a third party, if their data centers get attacked, they have to let you know. They have to let you know, hey, your information could be compromised. That way you can go about, changing all your passwords, double checking things, going over bank statements, whatever you got to do. But you need to know that that danger is there. For the longest time, there actually wasn't any legal reason why companies had to report breaches. It was really more of a thought of, well, will our stakeholders find out? Our stockholders, will they find out, and our profit will go down. But now, no, you have to report a breach so common people whose information is, stolen, obviously, so they know. So that, again, that's a very powerful change that's put a lot more strength in the individual's data protection. Obviously, company needs to have a data protection officer, meaning that, they got to make sure that this is a central role. This is a central concern. Not just some secondary, oh yeah, we really should, protect the privacy and everything. No, you need to have somebody who's guaranteed to be focused on that. And then, the interesting thing about GDPR, for those who fall under it, is there's a much larger financial sanction on an organization that's found to have broken it than there has been in the past. As you can see, it's fines up to 20 million euro or 4% of total worldwide annual turnover. So basically, they can fine you up to 20 million euro. And if you're living in the United States, the euro and the dollar usually trade about even. The dollar probably a little more. So we'll say between 15 to 20 million dollars, depending on the exchange rate, or 4% of your total worldwide annual turnover, if you happen to be a smaller organization. Because, in case, you're not in that tens of millions of profit all the time. But if you are, you'll get that top fine. and the amount that the fine was given is much higher than anything you had in the past. Beyond the fact that most companies had to be sued by individuals, there was no sort of state regulation on privacy of data in the past. And so GDPR, like I said, has really become the standard for privacy laws now. Other industries have always had tough laws, but even them, like say the healthcare industry, has Hipaa, which protects the records of patients and those who work in the medical field. But even Hipaa, after GDPR was reviewed and was made tighter and stronger, and again, more penalty if you break the rules. Doctors can lose licenses. Large profitable hospitals can be fined millions and millions of dollars for breaking Hipaa. So Hipaa is another privacy regulation similar to GDPR, but it applies specifically for the medical industry. So this is something that you really want to keep in mind when you're building out an application, or if you're running your business in the cloud. You're going to have personal information in there, whether it's your employees, your customers, or whatever it is. People's personal information is going to be collected, it's going to be stored, and you're going to have to make sure that you can do these things. You're going to have to make sure that you can collect all the information of an individual and provide a copy. You're going to have to make sure that you can reasonably erase the data permanently. You're going to have to know where all your backups are, because guess what? You're supposed to be getting rid of it. You're going to have to design explicit consent into whatever mechanisms or contracts or such that you're using. You're going to have to be able to handle the auditing processes that regulatory bodies are going to put you through to be sure that you meet all these particular needs. And of course, on top of that, you're going to have to make sure that your data is secure, that you're designing things with security and privacy by design, from the start through the finish by design. Because otherwise, you're not going to be following privacy laws. You're going to be breaking GDPR if citizens from the EU are using your services. You're going to be, falling out of the NIST guidelines, which means, you're opening yourself up to all sorts of possible attacks or business loss due to unavailability of your system. So when you're designing a cloud architecture, whether it's for full business use or whether it's just for a single application, you need to have all this in mind from the beginning. How am I going to monitor it? How am I going to facilitate the management of the data? Those kind of things have to be decided from the beginning. Now that we've discussed the privacy concerns and the security concerns that you're going to have to think about when you're designing your cloud architecture in the future, or planning projects, or whatever part of the journey you happen to be on, we can start looking at the solutions that Azure gives you that helps you in this venture. The first and most important one probably is Azure Monitor. The goal of Azure Monitor is to give you visibility into all of your cloud assets and give you the metrics and knowledge you need to understand exactly where you're at, how things are functioning, and where you might have to fix something, or if something's not operating properly. Azure Monitor is the place to find that. So the first thing we should talk about is that Azure Monitor is great because it works at so many different levels. On the insights, you have application insights. What that means is that it actually monitors an application. Let's say it's a web application. It'll monitor things like the amount of requests, whether they're succeeding or not. how much traffic is being taken in. So you can actually see the metrics of your application, and you can see if it's working, if it's not. It'll be immediately apparent how things are proceeding. On top of that, you can monitor any of your virtual machines or containers you might be running, so you'll know what's happening with their operating systems, with their memory allotments. Again, any other metrics that will help you have a better idea of what your resources are doing and whether they're doing what you expect them to be doing. Now, to do this, obviously, you need all sorts of different tools. They have dashboards, they have workbooks, which you can actually use to look at different visualizations, to make reports. They have alerts that you can set, so if something goes wrong, with a virtual machine goes down, or an application stops responding and is, giving a bunch of, errors, you get an alert, and there you go, on Slack, on email, whatever it is. You can also have different APIs that will interact with Monitor in case you want to use that data and send it somewhere else, or have it do something that's not exactly built in, but it can interact, it can be programmed and set to do that. So again, Azure Monitor is really meant to give you that wide, high up view of all your resources. And it can do this at a subscription level, it can do it at a tenant level. You can use any custom sources that you might have, and it's a really good tool to use, especially when you're trying to keep track of cloud resources and it just seems that it keeps growing or they're changing so quickly, because again, that's one of the benefits of cloud is development teams can quickly go in, spin up VMs they need, create applications, take them down, whatever you need to do. But that can make it hard to keep track of everything. Well, that's one of the problems that Azure Monitor really plays into, is being able to provide the logs and the metrics for you to really have a handle on what's going on with your resources time by time, day by day. And that way you don't lose track of where that private information might be, or you don't lose track of where better authentication or better logging and security alerts might need to be applied. And so again, so you don't get away from that thinking of, hey, I need to be building this so it protects private data, so it has security from the beginning as default, not as an afterthought. This is the Azure Security Center. This is the main portal, the main dashboard and control system that you're going to be using to make sure that all your resources are secure, are compliant for privacy needs, and really to keep track of everything on a much higher level view than just checking one resource after another one by one. Azure gives you a lot of built-in tools that make it easy to see what steps you should be taking. They make it very simple to see and visualize your cloud deployment as a whole. So let's get started in looking at how you would set this up and how you can use it. So when you get started with Security Center, it's not going to look exactly what my screen has here. Obviously, I've already been running it on this particular deployment, on this subscription. So I already have a lot of the data filled in, but let's go ahead and go over what you would do, the steps you take if that wasn't the case, okay? So what you would do is you go here to getting started, and they would give you an option to enable Azure Defender on your subscriptions. They give you 30-day free trial. I really suggest you do it. It basically puts EDR, which is endpoint detection and remediation, on all of your resources that are applicable. And yes, it costs a little extra per month, but compared to the coverage you get, the tools you receive, it really pays for itself in the end, especially when you're trying to provide, a full level of security for all your devices and all your cloud needs. Okay, so you would enable this. I mean, it's optional, but I would highly suggest enabling it. The main thing that has to be done is you have to install these agents. The agents, basically, they get installed on your VMs, on your platform as a service, different databases, all that kind of good stuff. And they make it really simple. You don't have to do anything yourself. You actually just tell them what subscription to use. You click install agents and it just happens. So it's really simple, pretty out of the box. It sets up. The one thing I do want to let you know is that once you install the agents, it can take a while to start getting data. You'll get some data right in the beginning, but you won't get everything. I know when I set this one up, it took a couple hours almost. It just depends on your resources. I guess Azure's activity level at the time. I'm not sure exactly what all the different factors are, but I just want you to know that it will take a little bit for the data to start coming in, but you should see it eventually, just like I have it here. Okay, so let's start going over what some of these visualizations actually mean. We'll start with the secure score. The secure score is really cool. It basically actually gives you a quantification of how secure Azure thinks your deployments are. And it's all based on different recommendations that Azure gives to better protect your systems, steps that you can take to make it harder for adversaries to exploit them, to guess passwords, to get through because there's no encryption, things like that. So it's really neat. It gives something that's really useful to get a benchmark of where you're at, and it makes reporting a lot easier. So let's go ahead and look at this on a closer level. I haven't really done too much here on this tutorial subscription. As you can see, we have not such a great score, really. When you think about it, it's 20% only. There's 55 points, and they do give you a point system, so it's kind of fun. But yeah, out of 55 possible points, I only have 11. So yeah, that's not going so well. But what you can do is you can view recommendations. Okay, and recommendations are really cool because they literally tell you what to do. As you can see, basically, I actually just got the points for encrypting data in transit, Azure Defender, obviously I turned that on, security practices, pretty nice. So let's see what some of these are. Let's see. Yeah, so multi-factor, that's an easy win. If you want to get you should always be using multi-factor authentication, by the way, on any account. So if you have, any accounts, Microsoft Cloud, Amazon, your email accounts, any of them, you should be having some sort of multi-factor authentication, preferably an authenticator application or a YubiKey, something like that. If that's not possible, though, you can use SMS, the text message. There's different ways of doing that. Some are more vulnerable than others. But you know what? In the end of the day, some form of MFA is better than nothing. It's kind of like the car lock. The really bad guys know how to get around it, but it's going to stop most of them. That's the thing with MFA. There's always going to be some exploit, some way to get around it. But guess what? It's going to stop brute force. It's going to stop dictionary attacks, password spraying, all those different methods of breaking your password. Boom, MFA stops it right there. Again, there's methods around it, but not all adversaries are going to have those available. So then we have some updates that probably should get done at some point. Let's see, let's look at this one. Oh yeah, see, it's pending automatic agent installation on those. That's weird. I thought all the agents were already on. Well, I'll have to look into that sometime. Again, this is the one I'm using for the tutorial, not my production account. So, all right. So we got some vulnerabilities. Vulnerability assessment solution. Let's see. I want to find the ones that have the quick remediate button. Oh, here we go. Remediate. So yeah, some of them, they have things built in. Like for instance, on this one, they're saying you should use some sort of vulnerability assessment solution. So they actually have one right here that you could just launch. Obviously, it's a paid service, so you want to look into the cost. But if you were just going for that quick, we need to do something kind of fixing, then it's kind of neat that they do that. Just always make sure to research how much costs are going to be and such. Remediate. Yeah, they're still saying they're pending. Let's see. We got a quick fix on this one. So management ports of virtual machines should be protected with just-in-time network access control. Okay, so we're going to let it remediate that one just so we can see what it looks like. Okay, so we got just-in-time access control now. So with just-in-time access control basically means that you're only going to have the ability to be, accessing that particular device for the time range given there. You're not going to be able to just keep getting access. You would what you would really do at that point too is you would go in and configure some things. Right now I don't have any. All my resources are internal. They're on a private cloud. They're not accessible from the public. So I haven't put any IP ranges or anything in there, but if you did have public IPs, you would want to make sure to tie those down. And so when you set that up, even if you do the quick remediate, you would go in and put whatever IP ranges you might be, giving access list to or denied list, depending on how you're approaching that. So a lot of the access permissions are going well. This actually is a really good one. I'm going to do that even on a tutorial. So what this is doing is this is saying that the storage account had public access. What that meant is that somebody could, read it from the internet, basically, from the outside world. They could get access to it, try to log into it, try to brute force the account, things like that. You don't want that. In Azure, it's your storage account. In AWS, it would be your S3 buckets kind of thing. You want to make sure that those don't have the public access. You don't want them sitting wide open on the internet. So as you can see, this is a really good thing to be going through, and to make sure that you're getting there. So it takes a little while for your secure score to go up once you start doing these things, but it will. Okay, so that's all we're going to talk about for this secure score. I think you get the idea on that one. Let's go to this other one because this is one of my favorites. They have the regulatory compliance right here in the Security Center. And I think it's really smart of Azure that they didn't separate this from your security screen. Because when you think about it, it's information security, right? So if we're going to talk about your information, we're going to talk about your privacy needs, we're going to talk about needing to manage this properly, design with security from the beginning, it makes sense that regulatory compliance would be right there where the security team could see it, not some separate operations type thing. So I really like the fact that they have it there. These are the default compliance frameworks that they have. You can actually go in here and you can go to regulatory compliance. Oh, this is where they fix it. It's not what I wanted. Let's see, is it secure policy? Yeah, it's in secure policy. Okay, so what you do is you go to secure policy, choose your subscription, and then it shows you which compliance frameworks are going to come in there. You can add more standards. So they have a lot of them. Hipaa, if you're working from medical, different Canadian ones, different NIST, UK. So these are ones that they have right there out of the box. Let's see. You can also add custom initiatives if you need to, or you can look at expanding these standards. So it's really good. No matter what kind of standards your organization needs, you can put them right in there. So again, they'll give you kind of a pass-fail type thing based on what controls you have. It looks like we're doing decent here. We passed on 312, only failed on 7. And we're not doing so good with this ISO. On the SOC, we're good. The Azure, we're good. PCI, not so bad. Obviously, if we were trying to do ISO 27001, we'd have some work to do. And as you can see, they do the same thing where they have recommendations. The big one here is the MFA is not on here. The main reason I don't have the MFA on here right now is this is just a deployment that I'm using for the purpose of this tutorial. I spun it up and I'm going to spin it down, meaning that see, this is the wonderful thing about the cloud, is that you don't have to have these permanent deployments that you're monolithically using and upkeeping. If you want something just for a tutorial, you just make it. You create a subscription, deploy the resources, they're there, in a matter of minutes. You can delete them all and recreate it. It doesn't matter. It's fun that way. It gives you a lot of flexibility. So that's one of the big reasons a lot of these basic things aren't on there. Oh yeah, so you should probably make sure that these are encrypted, things like that. Let's see if we trigger. Yeah, so they have different abilities that you can look into on how to fix these. They'll do the same thing where they try to give you ideals on that. Okay, so that's regulatory compliance. Obviously, inventory, it lets you see all your systems. I wonder what happened with the agents. They must have not installed properly all the way, because it keeps saying partially monitored. Very fascinating. So we have recommendations here. Yep. And they have, what did I? Okay, so yeah, you can see everything here. What workspace it's in, what version it is, when was it scanned, and then recommendation list based on this. Okay. The other thing they have, looking for it. Yeah, they have different query languages you can use with this Azure Resource Graph Explorer. So if you're familiar with different query languages, you can use that in case you have a lot of resources, because like right now you're just looking at this small little deployment I'm using for an example. But imagine if you were like managing an organization that had like hundreds of resources. You wouldn't want to have to like scroll up and down all the time. So that's when you would start using things like the Resource Graph Explorer, because then you could pull up you could sort resources, you could look up specific ones, look up, who needs what, who's red, for instance, who really needs attention, that sort of thing. So that's what the inventory things, inventory view and the query graph is really useful for. Okay, so here's Azure Defender. And as you can see, it's covering 4 of my servers and 1 of my storage accounts. And then it has different advanced protection that it will suggest. Again, so Azure Defender, it actually will give security alerts. So this is a full alerting system. So if it has malware or it's being attacked in some way, you'll get an alert. There's methods to make it so that those alerts send emails or Slack messages to any people who are responsible for working on them. All of that data also goes into Azure Sentinel, the SIEM application that Microsoft has for the cloud. Actually, you can use anything on it, both cloud and premises. So Security Center, by the way, is your management area. It's, again, I think it really has to do more with the architecture of your security, your active defense on it. Where the SIEM application is, again, it's used to monitor all of the logs, all the alerts, and also give you threat hunting tools and such. So again, they complement each other, but they really have 2 different purposes. Okay, so we don't have any containers with image scanning right now. This is actually one of my favorite things about Azure Defender, which is why I super recommend it. Network map. This will actually show you a wonderful diagram of all your network resources. So you can see that we have the tutorial network. It's on the default subnet Ubuntu 3. Tutorial subnet, our domain controller. I want to select all so we see everything. User 1, DC2. So it's pretty neat. And then again, you can filter. So again, if you have a really large organization and say you only want to see the ones that are high, then you could filter that and then you'd be able to see that. So, and there's layers. So like you can see allowed traffic. So who's allowed to talk to whom, which is pretty useful. So this is really neat, because usually you would have to be like drawing these diagrams yourself and maintaining them, but Microsoft does it for you. See, like when you hover, it lights it up. It shows you exactly where traffic is allowed. So if you had certain resources, like if you were splitting this up so that resources that talk to the public are in a DMZ and those that shouldn't, are in a different section, you could check and make sure that somebody hadn't accidentally configured it so they talk to each other. You could set the security group rules, network security group rules, and then just, you'd actually have that ability to double check, at a glance, whether or not they were able to talk. So that's really useful, really great feature. Really helps you keep track of everything. It makes the cloud feel a lot less like just some empty nothingness where you're putting resources, and more like something that you can visualize in your mind and you can actually, keep track of what's going on. So it's really cool. Network map under Azure Defender. One of my favorite features of the Security Center. Okay. So let's see what else we got. Again, this is where you would set some of these settings, like Azure Defender on or off. You can also do it per resource. So if there were resources that you didn't need to cover, obviously you're not going to get charged for things you don't use, but let's say you didn't want it on a particular resource, then you wouldn't need it. They also give the pricing. So you can see I mean, in my honest opinion, from my experience working with cloud resources and endpoint protection, this isn't that bad. It's just an extra $15 per server per month, and you get that protection, you get those tools, those monitoring tools. It's worth it, in my opinion. Okay, so data collection, again, we got it so that it's auto provisioning. When you install the agents, it's going to automatically set that. It's by default once you enable them. And what it does is from now on, whenever you create a VM, it will install the agent on there. So that's pretty useful. You can also bring in Windows event logs if you want to. It just depends on what kind of setup you're using. And then, of course, they got really good threat detection, Defender ATP, and Cloud App Security. You want to enable those because they'll be looking for active threats. We don't have any workflow automation going on, but you can set that up. And then another thing too is they have different cloud connectors, so you can add data sources from other cloud connectors as well to bring them in, and to have kind of like a single place where you can monitor things. And like I said, what you'd want to do eventually is move on from just using Security Center as a management and maintain the defense situation, to using Azure Sentinel, to having that 24/7 coverage, full visibility into all of your resources, whether they're in the cloud or on premises, and then have that ability to actually follow things like the MITRE attack framework and be able to show that adversaries are not in your environment. So that pretty much wraps up this section on the Security Center. Again, this is a very important tool. It's where you can really get visibility. You can quickly see where the faults are in your secure score. You can really simply find out where the regulatory compliance is or not. It actually auto-generates regulatory compliance reports as well. So that's really great. Let's say you have a meeting in the next week and you need to show that you're compliant. Then this will actually produce a report that says, what level is your compliance at, and you can keep track of things like your improvement and all that wonderful stuff. So, this is a really good dashboard, a really good information system that you should become familiar with if you're going to be working with Microsoft Azure. So we talked about the privacy and security compliances that you'll need to meet in the cloud. We've talked about how Azure Monitoring and the Azure Security Center make it possible for you to maintain that level of security and be able to meet those privacy needs. The question is, though, how do you design your original architecture so that it's ready to go, ready to meet those stringent needs for compliance and security? And the bigger question is, once you design, you lay out, roll out your initial cloud architecture, how do you make sure that any new additions meet those same requirements? How do you make sure that when you have a brand new team, maybe new hirees, when they're adding things, how do you make sure that those same compliances are going to be met, that those same security needs are going to be met? Because you don't always want to be putting the fires out. You don't always want to have to keep monitoring everything, hoping not to see problems. And the best way to do this is using Azure Blueprints. Azure Blueprints are a method of creating resources where the resources themselves, the access to the resources and security rules, and the policies that are going to be kept for different compliance platforms, different security needs, are all in one place that's easy to see, easy to edit, and can be repeated. over time for different resources. And not only that, but they can be managed with version control so that you can tell exactly where a certain application or a certain need base is, and you can tell, okay, was this the older version or is this the newer version? You can tell, when this was done, so that when you start getting confused, like I just did, when you start getting confused about what all you have in the cloud, it becomes easier to say, wait a minute, let's step back. What policies did we put in here? What were the security settings? Making sure everything's on track. And that's what Azure Blueprints does. And so what it does is it's composed of 3 different types of artifacts. The first are ARM templates. When we were creating the virtual machines in part 1 of this series, I showed you the ARM template. It stands for the Azure Resource Manager template, obviously, template. And so ARM templates are JSON documents that can be used to put exactly what resource you need, settings, setup, all those things into this JSON template that then makes it repeatable to deploy. So you don't have to go through the UI, you don't have to click everything, type everything in. You can define all that in an ARM template. And it makes it much easier when you're working with development teams, because then it becomes infrastructure as code. You can keep it, version control using Git or any other type of version control. And it makes management a lot simpler. Now, the problem with ARM templates, though, is that they didn't have any control over the policy definitions. It wasn't tied in to the larger role-based access controls that you need for, managing your security, making sure compliance is being met. And overall, there was no easy way in Azure to take those ARM templates, combine them with those other artifacts, and then be able to move them at scale across even multiple subscriptions like you have to in some industries. And so that's where Azure Blueprints comes in. They've made this possible now. Okay, so let's see some hands-on activity with the Azure Blueprints. So what we do is we come here, we go to all services, and then we can just search for blueprints, and they're there. Okay. Now, if you already had blueprints, you could look at your blueprint definitions here, or you could actually see assigned blueprints that are actually being used there. I don't have any, so there's none there yet. But when you're getting started, we can come up here to create a blueprint and click create. Now here's my favorite thing about Azure Blueprints. You'll notice that obviously you have the option of making a completely blank blueprint, which is great, but you have so much more. You will have sample blueprints that are set up to meet common need cases, common use cases that Azure's seen for specific types of server setups, network setups, and policy needs as well. So as you can see, you can come in here, and this one obviously very common needed compliance, ISO 27001, and it's an ASE SQL workload. So we'll look at this one. So when you click it, what it's doing is it's creating not only the resources for you, but it's creating them and making sure that they're all compliant, configuring everything, putting agents on them so that they're automatically being monitored. It's fantastic. You can take a look. I was going to look at the artifacts, but they want me to name it first. So let's do that. We'll call it tutorial DB setup. And obviously they always want you to put where it's going to be, which is Azure subscription 1. Because again, these are meant to be utilized across organizations. So there's a lot of larger businesses that have to use more than one subscription, and so they want to be able to assign it to a subscription, and then they even have the ability to move it beyond that. So that's pretty neat. So we go to next, artifacts. Oh, I guess we can't have, what, the space? Or the dash? Let's find out. Yeah, can't have the space. Okay, so here you can see all the things that they're going to create. And we can take a look at them too. Here's an Azure security template. Let's take a look at you. Okay, so yeah, this is telling it that it's going to be on the standard price tier for Azure security settings. Okay, so here we can see it's making a log analytic group for it. So where it's going to be storing all its logs and such. And you can edit these if you needed to. You know, if you didn't like some of the values. So as you can see, it's set for a number of days that it will be stored, where it's going to be stored, so you could change the location in here if you wanted to. And it's all commented, so you know you can see it's telling you exactly what it's going to be doing. So yeah, it's a Microsoft storage account that it's setting up that's going to be holding all these logs. So we didn't make any changes, so I just clicked that off. Okay, so here's a virtual network being set up for us. So that's pretty useful. If you come in here, it'll give you some options. Rename the artifact, what resource group it's in, give it tags, things like that. Oh, here's one thing that's important. It's creating a key vault for you. A key vault is a place where you can store all those wonderful passwords and such that you don't want people to know. And certificates and keys, you know, the keyed certificates that are used. You don't want those just anywhere. You want them stored somewhere safe. And Azure has a service for that called Azure Key Vault. And so this is the neat thing about using Blueprints is you notice how it automatically created it for you. You didn't have to do it as an afterthought. Maybe some organizations, when they set up a SQL server, they might not be thinking, hey, this is our data. This is where our private customer information is going to be. Everything we use to interact with it really should be stored somewhere that's encrypted. Well, that's what Azure Key Vault's for. And it's really, really useful when the Key Vault is automatically made for you. So that's very, very useful. Made a resource group for the database. App service environment resource group, so any apps that need to be created for it are ready to be provisioned. Okay, so whenever you do this, they're going to call it a draft. Okay, hold on, I went out. I didn't want to do that. Okay, good. We did get our blueprint definition saved. Yep. Okay. That took a second, and when I accidentally backed out, that was funny. But luckily, it did save the definition. So we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so the reason they do this, by the way, is they want to make sure that what you've set up is what you're going to, be using. Not only that, but those templates have basically now, the template that you were looking at has now been saved over into your own account. So now you can make changes. As you can see, it will keep the version, things like that. So we're going to go ahead and tell it to publish the blueprint. We'll just call it version 1.0. If there were any change notes, we'd put them in there. Okay, so it's been published now. Okay, so that's how you save the draft of the blueprint. And blueprint definitions is where you'll find it. Now, how do you use the blueprint? This is where you'll click on the blueprint. And then you have an option. Well, you have three options, really. You can edit the blueprint. You can delete it if you don't want it anymore. Or you can assign it. Assigning it means making it real. So if you click assign, you'll see this is a very common interface that you're already used to. And that is it's provisioning a full resource. And so you can still change the name, which is kind of useful. And you can also lock assignment. So let's say you created something, but you don't want people to be able to do things, change things. Then you can do things like make it read-only. So if you make it read-only, the assignment is locked. Deployed resources can't be modified or deleted, even by subscription owners. Not all resource types support locking. Okay. So this means that once the resources are made, nobody can change it. They remain the same. You can use them, but you can't change them. Now, do not delete just means that once everything's created, you can't delete something. You can change it, fix it around to what you need it to be, but you can't delete anything. So that's always good too. Or you can just leave it don't lock. It's all up to you. System assign just means that you're letting Azure Blueprints service have basically kind of root access elevation so that it can deploy everything properly for you. Organization name, workload locations, those are pretty obvious. Shared services subscription ID. So if you wanted VNet peering over workloads, you can still change the default subnet if you want it to. And then as you can see, it's kind of neat. Some of these fields, you can still edit them at the last second in case you forgot something. And then if you wanted to provision this whole wonderful environment, you could just assign. But I'm not going to right now because I don't need this environment. So the other option obviously is you can cancel. Let's look at some of the other blueprints they offer, because some of them are really cool actually. Not just if, okay, so obviously that was a useful one. So you can really just go into these and see what they all have. So like the Hipaa one here, let's just call it tutorial Hipaa. Oh, forgot to choose the subscription. I didn't like that. So what this allows you to do is this allows you to basically add a lot of HIPAA requirements directly to an environment as far as what they want. I am clicking in here because it's going to be easier to see what these fields are once we're in the assign versus what we were going to be looking at there. And then we'll look at what parameters it's asking for. Okay. So let's see here. Okay. So yeah, so these are, if you've ever worked with HIPAA, I don't have a lot of experience, but I'm familiar with a lot of its key necessities. So let's start looking at some of those. Depending on what application names you might have, storage account prefixes, certificate thumbprints, regions where the network watcher should be enabled. So this is these are basically your checklist for HIPAA, right? This is your checklist of what needs to be assigned, what needs to be done in order for you to meet HIPAA requirements with whatever Azure environment you're using. So right here, you don't have to sit there and think, what do we have to add to meet HIPAA requirements? Or you don't build a whole thing out and then be, oh, well, we're stuck now. No, this is telling you exactly what has to happen. And it's telling you exactly what you're going to need to have audited, what you're going to need to have set. And so it makes it really simple to apply all the policy and access requirements that you're going to need if you want to, be able to say you're HIPAA compliant. And they have a lot more. They have a lot, which is cool. And from what I hear, Microsoft is going to be continuously adding to this too. And they have some basic ones as well. Not all of us are doing something that needs an ISO requirement or HIPAA or something. But let's say you're just new to Azure and you want to make sure that your virtual network is being put together properly, because maybe you're a good application designer but you don't know as much about networking, or if you're just deploying a network and you want to do it quickly. Check this out. Okay, call this tutorial VNet. I didn't mean to put equal sign. Oh, tutorial, and we'll just do that. Okay. Location. Why do I keep forgetting to do that? Okay. Really? Okay. So what it's done is it's automatically provisioned our resource group, which is nice for it to do. And then it's automatically made a network security group, and it's automatically created a VNet with one subnet. So, and the network security group is going to, be the best practices for when they're set up. So you're good to go. See some of the other ones that I liked. The other one that I thought was pretty good was common policies. So a set of common policies to apply to a subscription. So this is pretty useful actually, because so they're going to provide a default tag and value to all subscription resources. And so what it's going to do is it's creating what they call a production resource group. and then they're going to be asking for the locations for all new resources, and then allowed resource types. So you'll be able to control what kind of resources. You'll have that control over what resource types and what resource types can be put in what places. And that becomes really important when you're trying to manage, where can certain application workloads be located? Where can certain data be stored, or where is it not allowed to be stored? And this just makes it a lot easier to manage that at a very high level and to scale. I thought that one was pretty useful, especially if you think about, like I was saying, GDPR, where they have a really tight control over where data is supposed to be, not just that it's secure, but that it's actually physically where is it. And so those kind of policies to have out of the box are pretty useful. So, and of course, they have the ones for their federal commercial use, PCI compliance, basically just about anything you can think of. And like I said, these aren't meant to just, oh, this is what's going to fit where I need. You can edit these, you can change them. Obviously, you can add your own resources using your ARM templates. And what's even better is a year from now, 2 years from now, whether you've had rotation and who's the cloud architecture team, or maybe it's been 2 years since you had to deploy a full database environment or a different application, and you're like, okay, what were those settings again? Where did we store that? No, now you got it all in your blueprint. You have the version control. It clearly states what policies are being met, what compliance is being met, what resources are being deployed. A lot less guessing work, which is the best part about Azure Blueprints. It takes away a lot of the guessing, and it's going to save you a lot of time down the road if you use them. Well, that concludes part 3 of our intro to Azure. We tried to close things together on a more higher level of looking at things. We looked at privacy compliance needs. We looked at security in the cloud. We talked about how Azure Monitor and Azure Security Center can help you make sure that those are your cornerstones of everything that you do in the cloud, how to maintain that security, how to stay on top of compliance, making sure you're meeting those needs and making sure that you're able to do things that make sure the private information that people have entrusted with you is being kept safe, secure, and they have access to it when they want it. And finally, we talked about Azure Blueprints and how they help you keep all of those difficult questions in mind from the beginning. How is this going to be secure? How is this going to be kept private? How is the integrity of the software, the integrity of the information going to be kept? And how are we going to make sure that that's being done all the time, over time? You don't want to just make a good first impression when you start your cloud architecture and then down the line get sloppy, because that's going to lead to a breach. It's going to lead to problems with customers, and that's going to be a disaster for everyone. So that's why Azure Blueprints gives you those solid foundations, but you can actually keep using them. You can keep repeating. You can alter them over time depending on needs, but you can also make them better over time. So thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure you turn notifications on so you can learn about new videos. This is Ivan with Skills Build Training.